Hello, and welcome to this month's recording of The Voice of the CDFA. I'm Carol Lee Roberts, the president of IDFA, and I am thrilled to introduce our guest this month. We're being joined by Kristen Shearin, and if I read you all of her accomplishments, honors, awards, and pro bono activities, that would take up the entire podcast, but I did want to highlight just a few of them. Kristen is an attorney at law, licensed and practicing in North Carolina. She is also a certified divorce financial analyst and a certified family financial mediator. She's published several works, including The Dependency Deduction and Easing Conflict Between Parents After Divorce, and has many awards, including the top 40 under 40 from the National Academy of Family Law Attorneys. One of the reasons I'm so excited to have Kristen joining us today is that Kristen has one more thing to add to her resume now. She has recently accepted the position of subject matter expert here at IDFA. So beginning in 2025, Kristen will be helping with our continuing education webinars that take place each month, and she'll be taking over this podcast. So let's learn a little bit more about Kristen. What motivated you to become a CDFA after you were already a practicing divorce attorney?
Thanks for having me today, Carol. And the reason I became a CDFA was I was actually working on a case, and there was a CDFA who was involved in the case. And the CDFA had some recommendations and some outcomes for us in that case. It was a collaborative case. We were all working together, and she had some proposals and some ideas of how things should be settled. And I didn't understand where she was coming from. I didn't understand the direction that she was giving us. And I wanted to take more of an active role in advocating for my clients and understanding the financial aspects of a divorce a little deeper. And in doing that, it was really interesting because I started playing around with the software that Certified Divorce Financial Analysts use, and I learned so much, and it's really helped me in my practice.
What do you think the role of an attorney and a CDFA complement one another in the divorce arena? I mean, I've been asked many times, why would an attorney work with a CDFA? Aren't you, both serving the same function? And I don't think that's the case, but I'd like to hear your perspective.
Yeah, not at all, actually. So I think that the two roles go together very, very well. So when you're in court, you don't have a lot of time to present information, and the information that you present needs to be compacted and concise. We just don't get a lot of time at court hearings to present a complicated financial story. And oftentimes, when we even prep our clients to testify in court, about their income, about their budgets, they can't do it. Sometimes you'll get a client that can, but more often than not, they're emotional, they're nervous. I've had so many clients, I can't tell you that, we've gone over it and over it and over it again. And when they're on the stand, I'll say, what was the balance on the data separation? And they'll just look right at you with a blank, nervous stare, and they'll say, I don't know. Well, it's right there on page 3 at the top, and they can't do it. And so I think having a certified divorce financial analyst come and testify in your case really gets better outcomes for your clients. And even if you don't go to trial, then you can use those results in a mediation setting. And so while I can do it and I can do that analysis, I can't present it in court. I can't testify in court, while a certified divorce financial analyst can. And while I may use the knowledge that I have or the arguments that I'm making in a mediation setting, I'm not a neutral. I am advocating for my client. And so the other side is much more likely to give credibility to that certified divorce financial analyst in a mediation or an arbitration setting. So I don't think they conflict at all. I think they're very, very different. But I will tell you that I do get hired all the time as an attorney, and they tell me that they have hired me because I'm a certified divorce financial analyst. I think that when it comes to divorce, people are, primarily concerned with money, and they want to make sure that they have an attorney that understands those finances. And the reality is, it's, a lot of attorneys, most of us get, history degrees or political science degrees, and we're not financial experts. And we get put into a role where we're doing a lot of financial analysis that maybe, our time would be better spent crafting more of a legal strategy or doing more legal research instead of sitting there creating spreadsheets. Certainly, I think it would save clients money if they were paying CDFAs to do that at CDFA rates rather than their attorneys at, $300-400 an hour to do it. And that's for even for the attorneys that do it. The attorneys that don't do it, they're having their paralegals do it. And, when you go and you interview an attorney, usually not asking them what their paralegal certifications are. So, I think the roles are very, very intertwined, or at least they should be if you're conducting a case effectively and cost efficiently.
So, what do you think? And you've actually kind of answered this, but what do you think is more critical in a divorce case? A strong legal strategy or a solid financial plan?
Well, they're both equally important. Obviously, the financial strategy should be formed around the financial plan in order to achieve those financial goals. I think the problem that we run into in litigation is that oftentimes you have to start a lawsuit in order to get the financial information that you need. Sometimes we have the client that has the financial knowledge in the case that comes to us, and then we can create the strategy around that. But oftentimes we have the client that doesn't have the financial knowledge, that doesn't know what money's out there, that doesn't know what accounts exist. And for us to get that, we have to file a lawsuit in order to have subpoena authority and in order to have the power to do discovery, such as depositions or issue interrogatories or requests for documents. And so oftentimes we have to start the legal strategy before we have all of the information to put forth a financial plan. So it's a little bit backwards from what it should be. And again, that's where if you can come together and have the parties cooperate to exchange documentation before you file a lawsuit, that's always ideal. Or if you can work with a CDFA and everyone agrees to provide that information to them, then you can formulate your legal strategy around it. But just oftentimes, because we don't have the data that we need, you're forced to file a lawsuit. And you may have to adjust your legal strategy after you get the information that you need. So it doesn't always work out the way that it should.
What's the best piece of financial advice you wish more people knew before they started a divorce?
Everyone wants to take the house. And I think to have the best financial outcome, you need a mix of cash and retirement assets. And I understand why clients want to keep the house. It's an emotional decision. It's an overwhelming time. You don't want to be disruptive for the kids. But oftentimes, in the majority of cases, you have to give up retirement assets in exchange for the equity in the home. And I think that that's always a bad decision when you're putting yourself in a situation where you don't have any retirement savings and you have an asset that's going to be expensive to maintain, expensive to keep. You're probably going to have to refinance it at a higher rate. And so I think practically it doesn't usually make sense to keep the house. However, having said that, I will say that 80% of cases, someone does keep the house. So it happens, and I understand why. But I think that would be the best piece of financial advice that I could give everyone, is to really try to get a mix of cash and retirement assets when possible. It's usually not possible when you're going to keep the house.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was the idea that sometimes you're working with the person in the relationship that is very savvy with their finances and knows what all the assets are. And sometimes you're working with the other spouse. One of the things I've noticed doing this podcast for the last couple of years is that a very big part of what CDFA professionals do is, to some extent, financial literacy training. Do you find that to be part of your role, even as an attorney, that before you can do anything else, you actually have to kind of educate both people as to what their assets and liabilities are?
Yeah, we do a lot of that. And especially when it comes to, child support and alimony and doing the budget planning and really coming up with a realistic budget. And so that's one of the things that I feel like I struggle with the most is, we'll work with a client or, a CDFA will work with a client or an accountant or myself, and we'll do their budget and come up with what their financial need is. However, in most cases, I can't get them that number. And that's a really difficult conversation to say, the court's not going to give you that. Your lifestyle is going to significantly change. Every single case that we have, the supporting spouse is going to pay more alimony than they want to, and the dependent spouse isn't going to get as much alimony as they want. And it's just really the reality of splitting up two households that used to live on one income, even if it's a dual income, they used to live with that joint combined income, and now we're dividing it and everyone's going to have a little bit less. And so depending on how financially savvy that person is, they may not even realize what their monthly expenses are. So you have to, one, tell them how much they are spending, and then say, oh, and by the way, now you can't spend that much. So it's very much a difficult conversation to have, because when I do take them to court and I don't get the number that they want, that they think that they want, or even the number that they need, because it's just not realistic in a courtroom setting, at that point, they're disappointed and they have to make that mental adjustment again. And so I try to do that up front to try to set some realistic expectations as to what they can expect in this process. And, and it's always a disappointing conversation to have.
Have you noticed any recent trends or changes in the way financial matters are handled in a divorce?
Yeah, one of the things that a lot of people are using now, and I really hope that this trend continues, is some of the budgeting software that's out there. Rocket Money, VPN. There's quite a few of them that are out there that are so simple that a lot of people are using them now, and it really helps when having to pull their budget data or their assets, because they've got it all in an app. So I certainly hope that's definitely made my life a whole lot easier, because we can just import all the information and the data that we need. Not everyone's using it, but certainly there are a lot more options out there than just QuickBooks now, for easy day-to-day budgeting. And so I really hope that that continues to be a trend, because it certainly makes our life easier.
Discuss a case where your knowledge as a CDFA made a significant impact on the outcome for your client.
Yeah, I have one right now, and we're talking about selling the business and splitting the proceeds, and we're kind of in a debate about that. But I happen to have understanding about the differences and the tax impact about whether or not we do, a stock sale versus an asset sale, and are we going to do, owner financing? And because I have a higher level of financial training, I'm able to advise my client a lot better than I would without that knowledge. Types of terms that we're going to include in the agreement. I think if I didn't know that, I wouldn't include those terms in the agreement. But because I do, we're going to, I feel like, have a much more detailed agreement that will lead to less conflicts down the road.
Does the CDFA play in a collaborative divorce? How does that differ from traditional litigated divorce?
So in a collaborative divorce setting, and for those that aren't familiar with collaborative law, that is where we actually sign a document, both parties sign a document that says that we are going to resolve this case outside of court. We are not going to file lawsuits, and we're going to work together with the other side in a collaborative setting to voluntarily exchange documents, to voluntarily hire experts, to avoid litigation entirely. And you sign a legal document that says that if this process does fall apart, that you actually have to fire your attorney, and that you can't use any of the experts that you used in this process. And so it's quite a financial step back if it does fail, which is the incentive that keeps it moving forward. So it's a great alternative dispute resolution process. I'm a big fan of it. In that process, where it is a little bit different, if I was in litigation, I may hire a certified divorce financial analyst to be my expert and to testify on my client's behalf. If we use a certified divorce financial analyst in a collaborative setting, that person is a true neutral. So they are hired as a neutral by both parties to come up with the best case scenario for both parties. And so it's a unique role. It's a very different role than when you're hired as an expert for one party. For example, you may do maybe your CDFA software will give you 5 different scenarios, outcomes for alimony. And so in a expert setting, when you've been hired by that attorney, you're only going to present the one scenario that is the most beneficial for your client. When you're in a collaborative setting and you're a true neutral, you're going to present all 5 scenarios. And then you may say, this is the scenario that I think is best, and here's why, but you're not going to hide that information about the other potential scenarios, at least from the attorneys. Maybe you don't present that to the clients, but it's something that you're going to say, well, here are some possible outcomes. Here's the one that I think is best, and here's why, versus this is the best outcome. Use this one. So it's a little bit different.
Let's take a step to the other end of the range from collaborative divorce and discuss high conflict divorces. And what are some of the red flags that you've noticed that you can, when you're in the initial stages with a client, these will make you go, no, this is not going to go smoothly.
Yeah. I think, the one I hear probably 3 times a week is, my spouse is a narcissist. I hear that. If you walk in and you tell me that your spouse is a narcissist, and I'm not a psychologist, I don't know. But to me, that just lets me know that, okay, this is going to be a difficult scenario. Outside of that, what tells me it's going to be a high conflict divorce case is honestly who is the attorney on the other side. And I hate to tell clients that. And that's why I'm such a big fan of the dispute resolution process and mediation and arbitration, because the second you tell me who's on the other side, I know if we're litigating or not before I know anything else about your case. Because there are some attorneys who are just litigators and they're not fans of alternative dispute resolution. Whereas there's some attorneys, if you tell me, oh, this attorney's on the other side, I'll be like, oh, great, I'll just call them, we'll schedule mediation, we'll voluntarily exchange documents, not going to be a problem. And so it's really important who your spouse hires. And most of the time, I will tell you that if someone has a great reputation in your community as getting great outcomes, they're probably a litigator, because you don't get unfair outcomes when you mediate. You get reasonable and fair outcomes. So if someone in your community is telling you, oh, go hire this attorney, they're a bulldog, maybe you don't, because that person is most likely a litigator. So I would really encourage people to read their attorneys' bios carefully and to really have conversations with their attorneys about what their practice philosophy is. And certainly if your spouse is willing to sign a collaborative agreement, I think that that's great. But even if I have someone in my office that's telling me, yeah, I'm going to mediate this case, my spouse and I sat down and we talked about it, we both want to settle this case amicably. If I see certain attorneys on the other side, I know that's never going to happen. So it's really, really important, if that's what you want, that you and your spouse are both seeking attorneys that work well together, that like each other. And it doesn't mean that I've had that a few times where I've made recommendations for attorneys to opposing parties in cases, and I'll give them a list and say, listen, these are some attorneys that I think are really good, that I work with really well, think about hiring one of them. I know that they are settlement oriented attorneys. And they think, well, I'm not going to hire someone because they're your friend, and maybe that may not benefit me. And the reality is that's not true. Those attorneys take their jobs very seriously. They are going to represent you. They're certainly not going to let a friendship get in the way of that. But if your attorneys work well together and they get along, things are going to be easier. We're going to exchange documents voluntarily. And so at the end of the day, it's going to save you a lot of money and time and headache. To the extent that you're able, I just really wish that couples would really discuss that in more detail before they run out and hire attorneys, because it matters.
It's absolutely true. And I never heard anybody mention that as one of the pieces of advice they would give to couples, is to consider, how your choice of attorney is actually going to impact how your divorce proceeds and what methods are available to you.
Yeah.
I personally, when anybody asks me what red flags I watch for, mine's always the one who comes in and says, you're my third attorney. Or, this divorce has been going on for 3 or 4 years. I always then assume that, it's unlikely that all of the other attorneys and all of the other personnel involved in this are the problem. The only common factor are the couples.
Yeah. The other thing, that people should really look at is oftentimes the attorney that you hire is not the attorney that you're going to get. Depending on the firm that you're at, they may have some junior associates that are actually going to be working on your case rather than the attorney that you thought that you were hiring. And so that's another conversation that, I would encourage people to have, is make sure that you're actually going to be working with the attorney that you think that you're hiring, because it's just not always true.
I really want to thank you again for your time today. And before I ask you the last question, I just wanted to highlight two things. Again, we at IDFA are very happy that Kristen will be joining us, and in 2025 will be taking over the podcast. Secondly, as you can tell, Kristen has so much to offer, and we've just begun to scratch the surface. So I'm going to put her on the spot and ask if she'll also be my December podcast guest so we can continue this discussion.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Good. Before you go, could you just give us some common myths that you frequently have to debunk for your clients about spousal support or alimony?
Yeah, I think so. Here's, maybe this doesn't directly answer your question, but here's what I wish that people knew is I wish that divorce planning was more of a part of our financial planning process. And I wish that we were having those conversations earlier rather than later. And I know that they're awkward conversations to have, but you've got a 25% chance of getting, breast cancer. So what do? You have a mammogram every year. And I'm not sure what the exact divorce statistics are, but say it's 40%. Think it's more than 30, but less than 50. So we'll just say, 40%. Well, you've got a 40% chance of losing half of your net worth. And so it really bothers me that we're not having these conversations until a divorce takes place. So, for example, I just had a client that she was a nurse, and she stayed at home for a number of years, and she let her nursing certification lapse. So if these were conversations that were had earlier, maybe she would have chosen to keep her certification current. I don't know if that's true or not true, but I think that giving her an opportunity to have that information so that she can make a more mindful choice is an important part of the financial planning process. Another one that I see all the time is if somebody had, their house before marriage, and then they get married, even if the house is in just your name, if you're making mortgage payments on that house during the marriage, then you've created a marital interest in that home potentially. If you renovate the house during the marriage and you increase its value, you potentially created a marital interest in that home. And so just if we had those conversations earlier, even though they're awkward, to have that conversation with a happily married person. But in my mind, it's no different than, we talk about death and life insurance as part of the financial planning process. But I think when people come to my office and they're proud of their investments, and they should be, they're proud of their assets, and they should be. So they take the time to pick out the different stocks and investment vehicles that they think are going to give them the best outcome. They take the time to invest in their 401ks, but they don't take the time to pay attention to the 40% chance that they have of losing one half of their entire estate. And so I just wish that that was a conversation that we were having earlier and more often, so that it's not something that you have misconceptions about when you do get to the divorce process. You should know what that's going to look like well before you enter the divorce space. And that's what I'd really like to see. I'd like to see us have that conversation.
It's funny because I do a lot of speaking at financial services conferences around the country. And most often my presentation is called The Case for Divorce Financial Planning. And I start out with the fact that financial planners normally don't discuss divorce as a possibility with their clients. And I understand that it's an awkward conversation. But these same financial planners will discuss death, disability insurance, long-term care insurance, property casualty insurance. So they're already having awkward conversations. As long as you're already in that, why don't you loop in the idea of what would happen in the case of divorce?
Yeah, and honestly, I think it would help couples stay together. I think it would be a positive thing. I think it would be a positive message. Absolutely in agreement that I think if we were doing that, then there wouldn't be these misconceptions or these surprises, or these realities that all of a sudden you have to accept and deal with at a point in your life when you're ill-equipped to deal with them and accept them, because you're dealing with so many other changes and the emotional impact of the divorce.
Well, thank you again for your time today. And as I mentioned, Kristen will be joining us for our December podcast as well. and also joining IDFA staff as our subject matter expert. Thank you, Kristen. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks so much.